You know, when I was a baby, my mother took me to England, and you know, we had a really challenging time the first 5 years there. And it was about when I was 5, she brought me to boarding school, and I was there for a few years. And it was you know, it was really hard to be away from your mother. I couldn't really understand what was going on, and I was all of a sudden in this school where, you know, your main primary caretaker is not there. And of course, that was a big impact on my life, you know. And then when I came out of boarding school, she was living in London, so I sort of learned how to adapt in the streets of London. I came a bit of a British London kid, you know, on the streets at an early age and surviving, and it really kind of shaped who I am a little bit in those early years of, you know, becoming independent. And at a certain point, I think I was about 8 years old, maybe even younger, she brought me to a place in Scotland where there were these Tibetan Buddhists, and you know, they didn't speak any English. And I remember walking with them in the garden, and I remember this feeling of this connection I had with them. There wasn't a dialogue, but they were really present, and they were really with me, and it was very beautiful. And it had an impact on my life, of course, because it was very different than living in a boarding school. It was something that I felt, it was feelable. I felt their presence. And of course there's mother's unconditional love, but I felt a different kind of unconditional love from them. Even though there was no communication, there was some level of a connection. And this impacted my life for sure. And then I found myself from that moment on somewhat of a journey. And not really knowing that I was on a journey, guided sort of in the intention of, you know, I was following connection. I was following wherever I could bond with people and meet people. Because I was so early on alone, I was longing for community and ways to connect with people. I didn't know it then, but I can look back and see that now. Other than my mother's unconditional love, that was the first time I really sort of started to feel that. And I couldn't name it, I couldn't, you know, place it somewhere, but I knew it as a kid. Kids know when they're able to really connect with someone. And it's, I think it's the thread that I've been following throughout my life. You know, I'm almost in my 50s now, and connection has been something very important, and sort of meeting people and even the communities I've lived in. It's been a very central part of my own development. So it's no surprise that connection's been one of the primary ways I work with people. More than ever, we're living in a disconnected world. Disconnected from ourselves, from our feelings, disconnected with others. We feel isolated, disconnected from Mother Nature. And it's not uncommon in the Western culture that we're over inundated with gadgets. We're constantly needing to reach for something. No one can really sit still now. We sit at a doctor's office, patients, you know, and we got to, you know, we're constantly on something, you know, or we're over medicated. You know, the moment I do start to feel something, you know, I go to the doctors and they prescribe a pill. Or we're finding ourselves, you know, overwhelmed and overstressed, and, you know, can't even enjoy the simple things like connecting with friends or loved ones, or, you know, even our kids. And our kids today are living more in a virtual world than in the real world. I always laugh when I go to a restaurant and I see these couples sitting there, and, you know, they're in the restaurant and they're on the phones together. You know, and they're texting someone else making a lunch date. You know, it's kind of comical. Somehow we have lost the very practice of connecting. And I believe this practice really starts with ourselves first. When we can really reconnect with ourselves, then we can connect with others. So what precisely do I mean by connection? Well, it's not about networking, and it's not about who you know, and it's not about Wi-Fi. It's not the virtual world. It's about refocusing our outer world to our inner world. It's like we're moving more towards orientating ourselves from the outer world to our inner world. So connection is one of the primary ways I work with people. When they feel anxious, when they feel lost, when they feel unfulfilled in life, or they've lost sort of purpose or meaning, or they feel isolated. Yeah, these are forms of disconnect. We're physically, emotionally, and mentally disconnected from ourselves. We've even lost sort of a sense of ourselves. And for some of us to even feel ourselves, we don't even know how we feel inside. And this disconnect can really derail us. So we begin to form these coping mechanisms of how to deal with stress, overwhelm, fear, anxiety. And so what are our coping mechanisms? We medicate ourselves. We do drugs, or we drink. How many people come home at night from a long day of work and that tension, and then they just reach for a drink? Yeah, or we overeat. That's a typical thing that you see today, happening today. There are many different ways that we have these addictions, just in order to deal with the stress, to deal with the overwhelm. You know, teens today, teenagers are cutting themselves. It's amazing what it's coming to in order to deal with these feelings and deal with the overwhelm, deal with the pain. So you can imagine your worldview from this disconnected place. You begin to feel mistrustful and suspicious. You feel restless. You feel lack of confidence, insecure. And you feel lost. So we sort of lose a definition of ourselves. Who am I? So what do I do when a person comes to me like that? Do I give them a pill? Or do I address the core issue of how they came to be like this in their lives today? So I work with people in helping them to identify where they disconnect, their patterns, their beliefs, their coping mechanisms, and then helping them to reconnect again. It's really at this point when we begin to change lives. So we're willing to look at what doesn't work in order to reconnect with our lives. So what happens when we feel more connected? We begin to feel ourselves again. We feel more confidence that I have what it takes. We feel more safe. We feel that we can really be open with others more. We start to retrust in life again. And more importantly, we start to follow our joy. Being more connected with ourselves changes the quality of our lives. And not just to the individual. It has a ripple effect. People can really feel your presence. And it's from this place we change our worldview. It's from this place we change our lives. We feel more connected with ourselves. We feel more connected with others. We feel more connected with the whole, with nature, with mankind. We feel like we belong. It's like coming home to ourselves.